There's something curious about this broadcast.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, and we have main engine start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff.
This is TGP Nominal. Commence episode now.
All systems remain nominal.
Hello everybody and welcome to this special edition of TGP Nominal, your monthly look at all things science fact and science fiction. Before we crack on with the show, I need to apologise for the lack of output recently. Although I have recorded content whilst out and about, life has got in the way for both John and I. In fact, John is unable to be with us today. Aww. However, this episode is still special nonetheless, and it will be revealed after this break.
Desire a place to get away? How about 3? You truly belong here among the clouds on Bespin, the first stop on your Star Tours getaway package. Stay and play in the clouds and enjoy the spectacular Galaxy in the Skies fireworks pageant every single night. The fun continues on the forest moon of Endor, where you'll sleep under the stars with the lovable Ewoks in their charming tribal villages. Your third stop brings you to the peaceful world of Alderaan, where you can relax in a natural wonderland, recently voted safest planet in the galaxy by Hyperspace Traveler. This Star Tours getaway package is 3 times the fun in one, so ask your travel consultant to book yours today.
This is TGP Nominal.
Welcome back to TGP Nominal for this special edition of the podcast. Ian Hine from Dead Universe Comics was supposed to be joining us for this episode, but unfortunately he was feeling under the weather. But I'm not flying solo, as you're about to find out. So you join me at the Discover Bucks Museum once again, and I'm here for a very special exhibition called Beyond the Stars. David Erskine from the museum has kindly allowed me to tour the exhibition when the public are not here, but it's a little bit different this time because I'm actually here with the guy who actually made this exhibition possible, and his name is Mike Tucker. How you doing, Mike?
Very good, thank you.
Now, Mike, you've had a very illustrious career in British Sci-Fi. How would you describe the kind of work that you've done?
Well, I grew up as a sci-fi fan, watching the Jerry Anderson shows, Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet, all that, and the Ray Harryhausen films, and, of course, Doctor Who and Blake 7. And so I always sort of knew I wanted to get into that side of the business. Trying to find information about special effects at the time was tricky. And it's only really after Star Wars and the explosion of interest in what ILM were doing and the behind-the-scenes stuff that the public became more aware of that sort of thing. But I always had an interest in this, and I was extremely lucky in that my career path led me to joining the BBC at the age of 20. In 1985, I joined the BBC Special Effects Department, and I've had a career in special effects ever since, and that, of course, has encompassed an awful lot of science fiction projects, whether it be long-running ones like Doctor Who, or what for me at the time was brand new products like Red Dwarf. Not brand new anymore by any means, but as I say, I've been around in this business quite a while.
And to be fair, back in those days, the budget on special effects wasn't great, but what they created, and people like yourself created with the money you had, was absolutely superb.
Well, it was one of the challenges, and still is one of the challenges of working in TV as opposed to film, in that the budgets are smaller. Even on big budget shows that the streaming services are doing these days, they're not feature film budgets. But back in the day, back in the 80s and the 90s, what was always fun is that you'd get a director who'd come in and sit down and they'd show you on VHS. This is what we're trying to achieve. This is what we want in our show. And they'd show you something like a scene from Terminator or one of the Indiana Jones films. And they go, we'd like something like that, please. And then your job with your crew and your team and your designer would be, how on earth do we do that on a BBC sitcom budget or a BBC drama budget? But that is the challenge. That has been the fun of the job. We never said no. We always rose to the challenge. Whether we were successful or not, 50-50. But at least we'd give it a go.
I think that's the one thing that a lot of the movie companies have found with the people that make special effects and props in the UK. They never say no. They always try to do the best they can with what they've got.
If an effect is unsuccessful, it's not because somebody's gone out of their way to deliberately do a bad effect. It's because it hasn't quite worked. And one of the things that always used to be a truth within the effects department was that you didn't have the opportunity to make a prototype, work out all the bugs and the kinks, then go back and make it properly. Your prototype was the thing that was in front of camera. Right. So you were working it out as you went along, and if it didn't work, you were sort of stuffed, really.
Yeah.
And then you basically do the best you can to make it work. But yeah, I think we have a fairly high success rate.
So what would you say was the project that you worked on, which was probably your favourite?
I mean, I can't deny that it was a real buzz to get to work on Doctor Who. I mean, I'd grown up with that show. I'd watched Pertwee and Tom Baker in particular were my doctors. So the idea that I was now working on an episode of Doctor Who in the effects department and going on location was a huge personal sense of pride for me that I'd got there, I'd done the thing I wanted to do. Because there's plenty of kids who say, oh, I want to do that when I grow up, and never do it. I did. So I'm incredibly grateful that I had that opportunity and that Doctor Who continues to be part of my ongoing career. So I'm not going to deny that's it. That's the biggie for me. But over the years that I've been doing this, I've worked on an extraordinary number of things. And I think what surprises an awful lot of people is that they assume that science fiction is the bulk of the work that special effects guys do, whereas in fact it's probably 2 or 3% of what we do. Oh, wow. 90% of the work that we're doing is for documentaries or comedy programs or light entertainment programs. So within a normal working week at the effects department, I could be working on Tomorrow's World or Top of the Pops or Last of the Summer Wine or Bottom, The Young Ones. These are the shows that generate an awful lot of effects work.
Oh, yeah.
And in my career post-BBC, when I was running the model unit, 90% of the work that we did was for the Discovery Channel, doing documentaries, mostly about natural disasters, volcano programs and tornado programs, and tidal wave programs. But I also got a chance to do puppet dinosaurs, because we did a show called The Last Day of the Dinosaurs about the asteroid that wiped everything out. Yeah. Although the show was a 99% CG production, they worked alongside us as a miniature effects unit to provide elements and pyros, but there were a couple of lovely in-camera sequences with puppet dinosaurs in full miniature sets. And again, as a Ray Harryhausen fan and a Doug McClure fan, I'm not going to leave old Doug McClure out.
Yeah.
To do something like that was a big buzz as well. So I feel as though I've managed to sort of cover sort of all the things that I loved as a kid.
You take those kind of things for granted when you're watching documentaries, because you forget that there's a lot of reconstruction of different things going on in those things, and they're going to need practical effects.
Yes, and the irony of our job is that if you do your job well, nobody knows that they're watching an effect. The effects that get spotted are the bad ones, or the ones that can't possibly be done any other way. But yes, I mean, for some of the tornado programs that we did over the years, there's plenty of footage of the tornado approaching the town, and there's plenty of footage of the aftermath showing what was left and the destruction. But nobody's thinking to set up cameras and film it as their house is being destroyed. So that's where we tended to step in. Yeah. And as I said, we did an awful lot of that sort of work over the years. not just for sort of present day stuff like tornado strikes, but ancient disasters. We did a fantastic documentary about the Minoan culture and what they figured was happening around the destruction of Atlantis. And we got to do lava bombs and pyroclastic flows and tidal waves for that. So yeah, sort of that sort of massive sort of in-camera destructive effect. I mean, if you do it right, doesn't take you out of the documentary. It keeps you there and keeps you thinking, God, this must have been horrible to live through.
Yeah. And you probably were working on those kind of things or experimenting with those kind of things when you were a kid anyway, lava stuff and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I was always a model builder as a child. I mean, Airfix kits, Lego and Meccano and all that sort of stuff. But once I started realizing that there was this special effects aspect that you could use for model making, it was then a question of, okay, so I've built these models. Now how do I make them fly or explode or crash? And so I borrowed my dad's Super 8 film camera and I was filming stuff. And then I, at school, found like-minded friends and we formed a little film group. And we were always trying to make science fiction films and horror films and sort of doing masks and gore effects and severed limbs and crashing spacecraft, and not with any real knowledge of how to do it properly, but having watched things like Thunderbirds, is that, well, it's obviously being flown on wires and there's obviously a miniature landscape, so let's have a go. And again, it's sort of, by the time I arrived at the BBC, at least I'd been doing this sort of stuff on my own, and then you're taught how to do it properly.
Yeah, yeah. So pretty much any training you had would have been on job, really.
Yeah, I mean, the BBC were very clear to me when I sort of announced that I wanted to become a member of the effects department. My parents very kindly arranged a visit and drove me to London, and I was shown around the effects department, actually when they were in the midst of making The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Tom Baker's final season. So I've got some lovely memories of walking around the effects department and seeing Slarty Bartfast spacecraft and some of the models from Warrior's Gate. And Michael John Harris, who was the head of department at the time, he said, what you need is a really solid background in as many different practical skills as possible. So woodworking, sculpture, painting, metalwork, the lot. And he said, and the best training I can suggest to you is go and work in a theatre. So that's what I did. I went off and I joined Croydon College, and I did theatre design, a 3-year theatre design course, which taught me lighting and stage management. It taught me costume cutting. It taught me makeup. It taught me woodworking and set building, polystyrene sculpting, latex, everything. So by the time I did arrive at the BBC, I did have this sort of basic knowledge. And then what the BBC do is go, okay, now we're going to train you in how that relates to working within the television industry. Wow. And one of the very first things that they would do with us newbies was go, right, you're doing Top of the Pops. Because it taught you how to work with a live audience, how to work with the camera crew, how to work with the fact that the show was going out live, how to operate the dry ice machines and the smoke machines and the glitter cannons. And you very quickly work out if you're good at this or not, because if you get it wrong, it's there live on screen. The same is true of Tomorrow's World. I mean, you know, that used to go out live on a Thursday night, so all the props that people like Maggie Philbin and Judith Hann and people were operating, they were normally sitting on a wooden plinth, and for most of my early career, I'm sitting inside that wooden plinth, operating the props with wires and pulleys and things. And again, if you get it wrong, it's going out live on BBC One, so you learn very quickly what you're good at and what you're not good at.
Because I noticed with a lot of those kind of shows, and with the sci-fi stuff as well, that if they were doing anything that might require something that was remote control, there was a lot of elements in the studio that might affect the remote control.
Yeah, K9 famously being the one that, you know, on his first day on set affected the cameras and the cameras affected K9. I mean, I don't think that's so much of an issue these days. But yes, I mean, again, you have to bear in mind that quite often we're pushing at the limits of what the technology was capable of doing at the time. Yeah. And again, I'm always very proud of the fact that the BBC effects department did push at these limits. They were early adopters of things like motion control for TV, We were early adopters of things like foam latex. We were always trying to get ourselves pushed towards what our counterparts in the film industry were doing. It's just we were always a little bit behind the film industry, but always knew it was there and wanted to do it.
And to be fair, anything that was not quite working properly probably ended up on the videotape department's Christmas tape.
Yeah, perhaps unfairly, whenever we used to turn up on location, there tended to go up a cry from some of the riggers and the sparks and some of the other technical departments, visual defects are here. And I always felt that was unwarranted because you're always there going, okay, it's easy to mock when it goes wrong, but you haven't seen the amount of work that's gone in to try and make sure that it doesn't go wrong. And sometimes you're lucky and sometimes you're not. I mean, I worked on a Doctor Who, one of the very last episode of Sylvester McCoy's era, Survival. My designer was a very, very clever man called Malcolm James, and one of the effects department's remits for this story was to create an animatronic cat. It's not the most successful puppet that's ever been made. I don't think anyone is going to sit there and defend it it's fine. But we tried, and some shots, particularly when it's shot from the back, work incredibly well. But it was also used on location an awful lot more than we ever intended it to, because the real cats wouldn't play ball. You'd let them out of the cage and they'd run away. So then you're stuck with everyone's laughing at the puppet and going, oh, God, that looks awful. And you're sitting there going, yeah, but it was never meant to be in this scene. The real cat was meant to have done this scene. So, yeah, as I alluded to earlier, nobody ever goes out of their way, let's deliberately do this badly. Mm-hmm. If there's a reason that it hasn't worked, you shrug your shoulders and go, we'll get it right next time.
Mm-hmm. How long were you working for the BBC?
20 years.
20 years.
I joined in 85 and I left after they closed it down in 2005.
Wow.
The actual effects department proper had closed down the year before. They closed in 2004. But I'd been kept on as a model-making addition to the BBC's in-house digital effects department because we had picked up a commission for a Channel 4 documentary called Extraterrestrial, which was proper scientific investigation of life on an alien world. And so, although the creatures that inhabited this world were full CG creations, the environments that they walked through were big miniature sets. So we'd got the gig. Nick Clark, who was my manager at the time, had worked very hard to secure this huge contract. And then suddenly the effects department had closed and he had nobody left to actually do the work. So he argued that I should run a one-man unit working alongside the digital effects guys who would do all the miniature and the practical effects work. And that worked very well. We did a really nice job on that particular show. And then, of course, we picked up the work on Doctor Who Series 1, the Chris Eccleston series. Ironic that the BBC had closed its effects department down just as Doctor Who came back, requiring a huge amount of effects.
Oh, yeah.
Now, obviously, in the intervening years since the show had been off the air, CG was the new toy. So the CG company, the mill, picked up the bulk of the effects work. But there was still the need for model work, and I carried on. But at the end of that first year, it was obvious that they were going to close down everything within the BBC's in-house completely. So by the end of 2005, going into 2006, that was it. They'd closed everything. And so at that point, I set up my own company and I carried on for another 15 years based at Ealing Studios.
Wow, at Ealing, that's a
lovely,
impressive place.
Lovely place to work, yeah. Lovely place to work.
Awesome. So when you look back at that, your career, is there anything you would have changed, or is it that you're happy with the way things went for you?
The truth be told, when I joined the BBC as a 20-year-old, and in the landscape of television as it was at the time, I was told you have a job for life. You know, that's it. You've got into the BBC and you'll be there now until your retirement, and off you'll go with your BBC engraved carriage clock and your pension. That was not to be, and I think in retrospect, it's a slightly naive assumption that the BBC would always have remained there. The fact that Television Centre has been gutted and turned into flats So I'd never intended running my own company, I guess is what I'm saying. So at the point in 2006 where I told, right, you don't have a career at the BBC anymore, what are you going to do? Making that jump, making that decision to set up my own effects company, and the learning curve that came with that was never something that I'd particularly planned on doing. Having said that, I wouldn't exchange the 15 years that I did at the model unit for anything. I worked with an incredibly talented group of people who were also my friends. We had an awful lot of fun doing it. And I did what I wanted to do, which was take television effects work and lift it a level. I wanted to see if we could actually sort of give the film guys a run for their money. And I think we did in some cases, not always, but in some cases we did. And very proud of the work we did on that series, on that run, and that 15-year run. An awful lot of different series, an awful lot of variety, always fighting an ever-changing industry that was moving in different directions, embracing CG, then CG starting to re-embrace model work again, creature work going completely digital and then coming back towards the creature guys again. So it was a turbulent time, but it was fun.
So what would you say to a youngster that wanted to get into the industry?
I think what I was told by Michael John Harris still stands true. The broader the array of skills that you've got to start with, the more useful you're going to be. If you're just a sculptor, you're limiting yourself down one path. If you're just a welder, you're limiting yourself to one path. So you need to have a little bit of knowledge of all of it. I would even say to the practical effects people, you need to have a knowledge of what 3D can do. And I'm aware of the knowledge gaps that I have these days with digital printing and CAD. So the more of this you've got access to, the more useful you're going to be. However, I think the other thing I would say to them is, like, whereas I was brought up in a department where you would be expected to do everything. So, as an example, on Red Dwarf, the 6 of us who were Peter Ragg's assistants got to build the spacecraft, we got to build the monsters, we got to build the hand props, the ray guns, we got to go on location and do the pyrotechnics and the rain and the smoke. We got to be in some of the costumes. We got to fly the models on stage. We got to wire the pyrotechnics for blowing these models up. All of it was done by the same 6 people. The industry is fragmented and specialised an awful lot more. So something like Red Dwarf now, there would be a miniatures crew, and there would be a CG crew, and there would be a creature crew, and there would be a physical effects crew. Right. So you're forced to sort of choose your area of specialisation a little bit more, which I think is a shame, because I always felt that the joy of working on something like that is that you could mix and match and work on everything. But all of these skills are still needed. You've just got to work out which department is the one that needs the most. So model making and prop making used to come down to the effects department to do. It's more likely to be the art department doing it these days. Right. The special effects crew are more likely to be doing rigs and atmospheric effects than they are prop making. Things change. There are still companies out there who do a little bit of everything, but there are fewer of them now than there were 20 years ago.
After our chat, Mike graciously took time out of his busy schedule to take us on a tour of the Beyond the Stars, a Propmaker's Guide to the Galaxy exhibition. So welcome back to TGP Nominal at the Discover Bucks Museum. Mike, what are we actually looking at right now?
Okay, so before we go through, I need to sort of give a little bit of background here. So I'm not saying for 1 minute that I built everything in this exhibition. Yeah. This exhibition is a selection, a handful of props built over the years by the staff of the BBC's visual effects department. So some of it goes back to the 60s and 70s, some of it is going right up to the modern day. And it's not all Doctor Who. It's from as many different science fiction shows that we could do that the public would remember. So we've got props here from Doctor Who, from Blake 7, from Red Dwarf, from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and from slightly lesser known series like the Tripods and Starcops. But Doctor Who is obviously the big one. It's still on screen all these years later, and so it was fairly obvious that what we would open with were Daleks. And so we have 2 Daleks here, both vintage from the 1980s, or specifically from 1988. They're both props from the Sylvester McCoy story Remembrance of the Daleks. So the one on the left is an Imperial, the white and gold Dalek that with the faction fighting for Davros, and the one on the right is the leader of the other Dalek faction, the Renegade Daleks, and it's the black and silver Supreme Dalek. Fiberglass, operated the old-fashioned way. There's an actor sitting inside on a little wooden stool, pushing the thing along with his feet, and operating the gun and the arm and the head and the eye. I mean, this is one of the things about the classic series props, is that the actors inside the Daleks, they had to learn the lines because they needed to know when to flash the lights on the head in time with the dialogue.
Yeah.
These days, the modern series, we've modified that slightly, in as much that although there's still an actor inside operating the gross movements, the movement of the head and the movement of the eye stalk is radio controlled by a second operator.
Yeah.
And Nick Briggs, who does the voice,
Would you like a cup of tea?
His ring modulator that creates that staccato Dalek voice is actually linked via a radio control transmitter to the lights on the props. So he is actually doing the voice live on set, and it's his voice that's triggering the thing. So there's no longer the need for people to sort of have to memorize the lines that they're trying to synchronize the lights to. So things have improved a little bit to that extent.
But they are absolutely superb. It takes me back to when we used to go to the seaside, and there used to be these Dalek ride-on things. You used to put 10 pence in them, and you used to be able to move the stuff around, and it just takes me straight back to those. And also it takes me back to when I was a kid. There was a Doctor Who exhibition, I think it was at Longleat.
Yep, there was one at Longleat and there was one at Blackpool. I used to love the Longleat one, and one of the things that I like about this exhibition is that when I was talking to David Erskine about it, I said it would be great if we could have the same sort of immersive walkthrough experience that you used to get from those old BBC exhibitions. And,
it does feel like
yeah,
it really does.
Yeah. So they've done it a really nice job with sort of the coloured lights on the props, and the fact that you round a corner before you see the next exhibit.
Yes.
So
it really is well put together, and it just finishes off your exhibit so well.
Alongside Daleks, I guess, the most recognisable aspect of Doctor Who are Cybermen and the TARDIS, of course. So you've got a display case here that's a mix. You've got a Cyberman head from a classic 80s Cyberman made by Richard Gregory's Imagineering company. This particular example is from Colin Baker's first season as the Doctor, and it's Attack of the Cybermen. The chest unit is significant in that it is actually got a little tag inside it that says David Banks, and David Banks played the Cyber Leader.
Oh, right.
So I know it's his costume. And the reason it's in quite tatty condition, of course, is at the end of the show, he gets blown up. So it's still got quite a lot of damage from that.
It's still in very good condition.
Yeah, it's had a little bit of renovation work, particularly the helmet, but the chest's pretty much left as it was. And we have a gun from the same story, one of the cyber guns. Again, various versions of these over the years, and the props evolve depend on how successful they were on set. If you had a prop that was constantly breaking, you tend to sort of go, right, we're going to rebuild that, slightly more robustly, and that's what happened with the cyber guns. The ones that had been originally introduced in Earthshock with Peter Davison had a tendency to snap in the middle, so the effects designer modified them slightly. And then alongside them, another bit of cyber technology, coming right up to date, in fact. I mean, the cyber mats originally introduced in Patrick Troughton's era and hadn't been seen in the show for a very, very long time. And I tried to have them reintroduced into the show in 1988 for the 25th anniversary story, Silver Nemesis. And it was vetoed. The script editor at the time, Andrew Cartmel, said no. He said, I never found them remotely convincing, so they didn't make it to the screen. But when that particular season was released on Blu-ray earlier this year, there was a new cut of that particular episode, not as a replacement to the original footage, but as an addendum too. You could watch either version.
Right.
And Pete McTeague, who was in charge of the editing of this new version, we were chatting and I mentioned that I'd originally hoped that the Cybermats could make a reappearance. He went, oh, we'll put them in the new version.
Oh, wow.
So we went back and we reshot some new footage that was edited into it. And so my Cybermat design that I came up with back in 1988 finally makes it to the screen 30 years later.
I remember seeing, I think it was one of the old Doctor Who annuals, and they had some sort of breakdown with showing you this is a such and such sensor, this is that, this is the other, and they had a Cybermat on there. And when I was a kid, they did actually scare me, because anything that attacks your feet scared me. I hate my feet being touched, so that was really scary for me.
You know, I always loved them. I mean, I think they work really well as a monster, or an addition to a classic monster. They're a surveillance and a stealth thing, as you say. It's this thing of seeing something out the corner of your eye scurrying.
And you don't see it again, you think, did I see that or did I see that? And the next thing you know,
And then the TARDIS miniature is coming slightly more up to date. I mean, this is actually a quarter scale model of the TARDIS from Matt Smith's era.
Oh, wow.
And this is actually the one used in Matt's final story, The Time of the Doctor. So we were doing a big miniature effect sequence of the village on the planet Trenzalore being attacked by Daleks and buildings being blown up and roofs being blown off. And we had a call from the production saying, we need a shot right at the end of the show of the TARDIS being hit by regeneration energy and not quite knocking it over and then falling back. Is that something you could do as part of your model shoot? And it was like, yep, we can do that. So we took one of the miniatures that had been built for the 50th anniversary story, The Time of the Doctor, repainted it in the correct livery for Matt's era, and set that up. We had it tethered onto a miniature set with all wrecked buildings around it, and then we fired a very high pressure air cannon at it to try and get the shot of it knocking over. So a last minute addition, but it meant that the production got the shot they wanted, and the model survived filming. So here it is.
I mean, the detail on it is superb.
Yeah, I mean, again, we got a really nice sort of working relationship with the art department by this point. So Michael Pickwood's team sent us really good reference of what the full-size prop looked like, and then I was able to have those parts CNC cut and then molds taken and fiberglass pieces. So yeah, I mean, it's a nice thing to do, making sure that you've got things like the correct patterns on the windows, the right gel and the lighting, getting the lamp turned up right. I mean, the TARDIS is a simple shape, but if you get it wrong, people notice. So,
and Whovians do pick up on that kind of stuff. Okay, so sticking with Doctor Who, we've got one of the Vok robots from Robots of Death. I mean, not strictly speaking an effect, in as much that it wasn't designed and built within the special effects department. It's a good example of a Doctor Who robot made by the costume department. I mean, not just a good example, a superb example. Yeah. The Art Deco head and the sort of quilted body. I mean, Robots of Death is a true classic episode, and this is a good surviving example of why these are so terrifying. There's a stillness and a simplicity about them, and a precision that makes them really, really creepy. So delighted to have this on display. I think that's what makes Doctor Who, is there is a stillness about certain characters, and it's because of that makes them scary.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're in, a run of the show where Tom's at his height. You've got a great script editor and producer. They're producing little horror films on a Saturday night, effectively, and certainly very influential to me as a kid. So yeah, delighted that one's there. Wow. And again, from 77, so we're going back a fair few years now.
Yeah, and to be in that kind of condition, I gather there may have been a little bit of touching up here and there.
Yeah, I mean, the last time it actually was sort of refurbished was when that particular story was released on DVD. So I think we're still going back to the 90s.
Yeah, yeah.
And a costume designer called Rob Alsop, who has carried on his work with the new series. A lot of monsters in the Jodie Whittaker era made by Rob. He did things like the leggings and the feet for this particular costume, because they'd gone missing over the years. But on the whole, there's a little bit of moth damage here and there, but on the whole, it's hanging in there. This is a personal favourite. It's a very well-regarded Doctor Who story called The City of Death, from 1979. Tom Baker and Lalla Ward as the Doctor and Romana. Douglas Adams script editing at this point, so all that sort of hitchhiker humour is coming into the show. The first foreign location with them filming in Paris.
Wow.
But it opens with this glorious miniature effect sequence of finding the Jaggeroth spacecraft on prehistoric Earth. Again, Ian Scoons, who'd done the lovely storyboards that we saw earlier, was the effects designer. And this model has been in my collection for some time and rarely makes it out on to display. So I was absolutely delighted that we were able to get it not just into a case and on display here, but Dave Bellamy, who's been working to put all the cases and the general feel of this exhibition together, revealed that he was an oil painter and specialising in landscapes with really dramatic skies. So he's the man who's painted this fantastic backdrop for this. So we were able to recreate something that really feels like it looked when it was on screen back in 1979. So I'm absolutely over the moon how well this came out in terms of its display and its lighting and just how good the model looks, given that it's nearly 50 years old.
Yeah, it's superb. I think that this may have inspired Lucasfilm, because in Star Wars Episode 2, there's these command ships, very, very similar to this. I've just got a feeling that they may have been inspired.
It's always tricky to know who inspires what and what inspires what. I mean, Ian always claims that his inspiration from this was a spider. He just said, I wanted a black bulbous body and spindly legs. And he felt that if you created that sort of inherent gut feeling with it looks like a spider, it's going to make it memorable, and I think he achieved that.
That definitely
for a spacecraft from a story, I mean, they're not recurring monsters, they haven't been back dozens of times. So yeah, it's an interesting one, and you do wonder that if an impressionable kid watching this in 1979 has that in the back of their head, if they're then designing something 20, 30, 40 years later.
Yeah,
so it could well have been an influence. I just think it's a very strong, very bold, very striking design.
But I think if you design something that's insectoid, or in this case arachnid, it's got a lot of fears for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So it will be scary.
And there's a lot of, if you actually pop the lid off this thing and actually have a look inside, the mechanism is incredibly complicated and very clever. There's a motor that turns a disc that pulls rods that makes the lift pull up on cue. So this was all operated, I'm assuming, by radio control. It might have been done by the wires that were suspending it, but I think it was radio control. Something that these days you'd just go, oh, we'll do that in CG. But at the time, they're going, no, we're on a miniature set. We've got a painted backdrop. The thing needs to take off. The legs need to fold, and it needs to explode. And we're fortunate in that Ian chose to actually put the explosion in as a post-production effect. They did a snap cut from the model to a bag debris, rather than blowing the actual model up.
Yeah.
Otherwise, this wouldn't survive to today.
Right. And I also think there might have been a bit of inspiration for, I know something we'll be coming on to later on, but tripods.
Yeah, well, the very fact that it has 3 legs, I mean, there's an automatic, and certainly the people who were around in the effects department when this was being done were around when the tripods came along.
Yeah.
So you certainly do get a through line of design aesthetic through various members of the effects department.
Yeah,
so you
definitely.
never know.
Yeah, that is awesome though. That really is. And as you say, the backdrop just
Really sets it
literally
off.
makes
you back in
it pop.
time.
Makes it pop. Wow.
I think if we come back and we do this again, I'd be looking at all the spacecraft miniatures and thinking, how can we get an environment to sit them in?
But then again, that's going back to your childhood with models and trying to
Absolutely.
make dioramas.
Yeah,
and
exactly. So leaving Doctor Who behind and entering the comedy world of Red Dwarf, but a comedy world where Peter Ragg, the effects designer, said, even though the show is funny, the effects shouldn't be. We're not doing comedy effects. We're doing the effects as if it was a straight drama. So slightly quirky designs, but no less effort goes into the making of them. And this is the Starbug.
Yes.
And in fact, it is the original Starbug. It's the one that was built for Series 3 and lasted throughout the entirety of the original run of Red Dwarf on the BBC. So, as is famously said in the show, crashed more times than a ZX-81.
Yeah, definitely.
So built by my colleague Alan Marshall. It's mounted on a blue pole through one of 6 mounting points that this particular model had. It could be mounted from the bottom, the top, the side, the front, the rear, depending on what the motion control team needed from it for shooting it. And then once all the motion control stuff was out the way, it was unbolted from its pole and then wire flown for all of the flying scenes and the crash scenes. So seen an awful lot of use, this particular miniature.
I can still remember seeing on the Smeg Ups and that where it literally crashed a lot of times.
Well, the first year that we were doing this, it was Red Dwarf Series 3. It's the episode called Body Swap, and we needed the Starbug to crash onto a moon. It's being piloted by Lister, but in Rimmer, but in Lister's body.
Yeah.
And Alan, who built it, said, well, how are we going to do the crash? And Pete said, chuck it. So we literally got the camera set up, knew where it was going to land. He stood off the side of the set and he threw it. And it arcs in and it hits the ground. You get this dust going everywhere. It looks absolutely spectacular. So absolutely amazing sequence. And again, put back together, redone for Series 5. It still shows a little bit of sort of flame damage from it taking off in Series 7. But definitely one of those spacecraft that sort of took hold of public imagination.
Yeah.
It wasn't originally meant to be a thing called Starbug. Originally within the show, the script called for a shuttlecraft called the White Midget. And I believe that there's still a line in Series 3
they
where
do
they say,
the
let's
White
go
Midget.
to the White Midget.
Yeah.
But when we were designing what the spacecraft would look like, one of the images that Alan came up with was of this 3 spheres with legs, and the writers, Rob and Doug, went, oh God, we love that. That looks like a giant bug. So it was renamed the Starbug, and they said, well, you've got to make it green. And the Starbug was born.
It is such an iconic spacecraft. And I think there's a little bit of a throwback to Space 1999 there with the feet. It's similar to the Eagle landing feet.
Well, Alan, he was a great fan, like all of us were, of the Anderson shows and the Meddings designs and the Brian Johnson designs. So yeah, there's a deliberate hark back to things like the Eagle. But also, I mean, Alan was very keen. He said everything in Red Dwarf needs to have a very distinct and immediately recognisable identity.
Yeah.
So he said, look, instead of all the spacecraft being grey or white or off grey, let's actually get some colour. The Red Dwarf is red. Starbug is green, the Blue Midget is blue, and so we sort of we rolled that into all the guest spacecraft as well, and so things are bright orange. The Esperanto is yellow. The Scouter is black and striped like a wasp. So there's a very, very strong visual language that's used in all the Red Dwarf spacecraft, which you wouldn't necessarily do in a sort of more serious sci-fi, like a Star Wars or a Star Cops. But the nature of Red Dwarf allowed us to play a little bit more with the colour, and they're instantly recognisable. And it's the same reason that Thunderbirds works. Each of the craft is a distinct colour.
Yeah. And again, we're looking at a couple of the other ships you mentioned here. We've got the light ship in front of us right now, which is a very iconic craft. Ace Rimmer is such a beloved character.
Yeah, and within that show there were two distinct vehicles. You see him first arriving in the light ship, and then he gets into the dimension jump ship. Yeah. So I did this one. This is one of my builds. Wow. So I went orange. Rocky did the dimension jump ship. That's bright red. This is only actually featured in one shot, I think, in the final episode. Yeah. Originally, there was a much longer sequence because we, as the effects department, tended to go, right, we'll do a scene of it coming in and landing on a pad and the pad lowering down, because we're trying to indulge our inner Thunderbirds fans. But Rob and Doug and Ed Bye and all the directors are going, but it's not a show about effects. It's the gags that people are waiting for. So quite often, some of our longer effect sequences did get cut because they'd rather have more gags than spacecraft. But on the whole, I think we always got a nice balance.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. But then, again, the show wouldn't be the show without a lot of the...
Yeah, I agree.
The models.
I think they complemented each other really, really well.
It's just fantastic to see them.
And the same is true of the hand props, of which we have examples here. It's like, so these are just 3 examples of some of the hand props made for Red Dwarf. Classically, we've got a bazookoid. From Series 7, the shorter barreled version of the bazookoid. And then you've got 2 sort of guest props. You've got Simulant Pistol from Justice, which quite a complex prop given that it's only in one story. It needed to have a blade that's shot out on cue. It needs to be able to fire and be reloaded. And then you've got Crichton's Jake Bullett's gun from Back to Reality, which is very much a throwaway. It's in one scene. But it had to function. It had to have one magazine that gets pulled out and another one that gets pulled in. So all of these props are examples of things that, have to be put together quickly, but also have to be robust enough to survive filming on set. Yeah. We were talking earlier about the cyber gun and it breaking. Well, Craig Charles was known as the prop buster. Yeah. Because you gave him a prop and he would break it. So it became almost a joke in the end that we were welding things together that we knew Craig would be using, so he couldn't break them.
So was it a case of, well, let's see if it's Craig-proof?
Yes, pretty much. Pretty much. So by the time you get to things like the bazookoids, it's like, well, it's got to be Craig-proof. It's got to be Craig-proof, because he will find a way of breaking it. Not deliberately going out of his way to smash it, but there'd be something in his performance, like he'd want to chuck it and catch it one-handed, or he'd want to swing it onto his shoulder in a particular way. It's like, well, if that's what he's going to do, you don't want to restrain his performance because the prop's broken, so let's make the prop heavier and more robust. And so partly it's why these things survive, because they've been built to last.
And the thing that I've noticed, particularly on the Simulant Pistol, is there's lots of details that you probably wouldn't have seen in the TV show anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm indulging myself here a little bit. So the prop itself is covered in graffiti. It's got "Make My Day," "My Other Gun is an Uzi 9mm." The other side actually has FOAD written on it.
Oh, right.
And safety catch, what's that? And you can see right at the back, just above what the trigger, it says Bisley 2000. Well, Simon Bisley was the artist who did the ABC Warriors in 2000 AD.
Oh.
And they always had these outrageously over-the-top guns covered in graffiti. So that is me.
Just a little bit of a
nod to the fact that sort of this gun is very much the sort of thing that Simon Bisley was drawing in 2000 AD.
It does look very Judge Dredd, doesn't it? It's that kind
Joe
of...
Pineapples and the ABC Warriors. That's where I was going with that.
That is...
And even things like Crichton's gun, you know, it's a Tucker PPK as opposed to a Walther PPK. Again, you're never going to see it.
No, but it's just fun to have it there, isn't it?
The lightship that we passed earlier has got a serial number on the side. That was the phone number of the main reception at the effects department at Kendall Avenue. If gags like that are spotted by the audience, then you've gone too far. That's an in-gag that only I know is going to be there. I mean, the furthest I went was putting a TARDIS miniature inside the Starbug landing bay set.
But then on, I think it's one of the things in Star Trek, there's a menu of all the different things on, I think it's in Deep Space Nine. I think Jupiter Mining Corporation is actually mentioned in the menu, which is a nice little homage. I mean, all the different people who create sci-fi love the other shows.
That's right.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of TGP Nominal and its infinite mission to explore space, science, and technology news, to explore the world of sci-fi, comic-cons, and gaming, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before.
So again, we jumped to a different but equally cult BBC sci-fi show, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and here we have the classic Marvin, the paranoid android.
Oh God, I'm so depressed.
Stood for many, many years in the corner of the main reception of the BBC effects department.
Really?
And then stood in my office for many more years at Ealing. Reason he's in such good condition is that he was actually properly crated, which is unlike an awful lot of things that happen to the effects department props. Most of these things tend to get chucked in a box or chucked out. But he was properly crated, and on top of that, we were asked in 2003, 2004, when they were doing the feature film version of Hitchhiker's Guide, whether he still existed. And they asked if he could be refurbished for a little cameo in the film.
Yes, he's in the queue, isn't he?
That's right.
And they're trying to get the paperwork to get
Trillium
released. Yeah.
So Martin Freeman walks past him or shoulders past him and gives him a little double take. So that was really nice, and we've got some photos of both iterations of Marvin meeting up. But yeah, a great character. I mean, a really nice design by Jim Francis. I can't think of Marvin looking any other way than this.
I mean, the new one is nice, but it isn't right. Alan Rickman's voice is superb for the character, but it's not the original.
It's not him. So again, the very few bits survive from Hitchhiker. So the fact that Marvin still survives is great.
It does look very well put together. I mean, there's a lot of metal actually on there.
Yeah, a very heavy thing to wear, very uncomfortable thing to wear. I mean, David Lerner, who wore the suit in the TV series, there are a couple of photos of him, being taken out of the suit, and he's absolutely drenched in sweat. So I don't think it was a fun thing to operate. No, we had a dancer operated him for the film, and even though she wasn't wearing the legs, because there was no need for it, because you couldn't see him from the waist down, she still struggled to sort of get a performance out of him. But I'm glad he made it into that film. It's a nice little touch back to the original series.
Yeah. When I went to see it at the cinema, it was at the opening weekend. It was strange because I went to see somebody who didn't know anything about hitchhikers and somebody that did. And throughout the crowd, when something like this popped up, you could tell the people that knew the franchise.
So we've got a couple of bits and pieces from Blake 7. A spacecraft and a Federation gun. I'd desperately like to get more Blake 7 stuff in here, and if we do this again, I'd be looking at that. but for a variety of reasons, props weren't available to us this time round. But again, Matt Irvin loaned me this beautiful model of the Atlas shuttle and the Federation blasters from my collection. So a show I'm very fond of. The BBC trying to do a hard sci-fi on a BBC budget.
Very low budget, yeah.
But still creating memorable stuff, and in many ways I would say Blake 7 is possibly more of an influence on me going into the effects department than Doctor Who in some ways. But and I think things like, you know, the Liberator and the Pursuit ships are just beautiful, beautiful pieces of science fiction design. So I'm glad we've got a little piece of Blake as part of the larger story here. And then the other two, as I say, obscure to the point that some people have never heard of them at all. So Star Cops was a very short-lived series from the effects department of the BBC. Originally planned as 13, but actually ended up only going out as 9 episodes.
Oh, wow.
For a variety of reasons. I think strikes got in the way, and a very troubled production in terms of the relationships between the writer and the producer. But the effects department working at absolutely the top of its game to try and ensure that we were competing with what was coming out of the States at the time. So the model work for Star Cops is some of the best stuff that we ever did. I mean, the motion control work is superb. The landscape work based on the moon with the moon buggy and the moon base is stunning. The prop work is top class. Every aspect of the visuals of Star Cops works incredibly well. And these surviving miniatures here, I think, do a really good job of just showing of how much care and attention and a level of detail went into this. I mean, this was, I didn't work on Star Cops, but this was being made in the effects department when I first joined. So I remember sort of seeing all this stuff being made around me and thinking, gosh, you know, I've joined this incredibly clever bunch of people. And I think they stand up really, really well.
I think they do, because I look at this stuff now and think to myself, there's things out there in Space Fact that's just very similar to this.
Well, Mike Kelt and Malcolm James, who are the two effects designers, they went and talked, I think, JPL, about what the projections of space vehicles and space stations were going to be, and extrapolated that from the NASA, you know, at the time, you know, 89, 87, and the shuttle and all the rest of it. So everything's still got the heat. Everything's recognizable as being technology that you're familiar with, but taken that little bit further. Proper science fiction, not science fantasy.
The shuttle, there's two things that spring to mind with. There's a shuttle that looks very similar to that. That's going to be launching within the next few years, and it's called the Dream Chaser.
Okay, yeah.
And it's virtually the same as that.
It's a weird mix of shuttle and lifting body. Mm-hmm. But at the time, I think there was indeed a small Russian shuttle.
Yeah, I know which one it is.
So there's a lot of influences going into that.
In fact, when that became defunct, if I remember rightly, NASA took the plans and worked on it from there.
Right.
But also, I don't know if you remember, there was a Walt Disney production called A Spaceman in King Arthur's Court.
Yes, yeah.
Very similar to the space shuttle that was in that as well.
Yeah, definitely some design cues from that.
I believe there's a full-size replica of in Black Gang Shine in the Isle of Wight.
Okay, I should bear that in mind if I'm ever there. And then our final piece in this little section is the main silver tripod from the tripods. So again, 2 series, famously cancelled at the end of series 2 before they got around to filming the finale from the 3rd book, so a very rushed and rewritten ending to series 2. And the BBC very ambitiously deciding to use the new Quantel paintbox system to try and incorporate miniatures into live action sets. So they would go off to locations around the UK and Germany and France and Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And then the tripod itself would be shot as a blue screen element back at Television Centre to incorporate into the scene. So very forward looking in terms of how modern productions are done. You know, we're going to do all this blue screen post-production work. Very early days of the technology, so the BBC pushing very, very hard what was capable of being done at the time, and it's a very well regarded series.
Oh, it's got a cult following. It really has.
Now, for a series called The Tripods, I actually find it slightly annoying that the tripods don't turn up more often than they actually do. But when they do show up, they're very impressive. And I vividly recall a sequence where a tripod mounted with guns pursues the boys through a forest at night, and it's a fantastic sequence where the tripods are only ever illuminated in the flash frames from the explosions, and it shows just how well the technology could be used. And it's a huge shame that it didn't make it to that third series, but this is one of the surviving miniatures. There's this one, and there's the red gunner tripod still survive, and some of the smaller models, but very little else from this series actually survives. An awful lot of it got junked when the effects department had to give up its warehouse.
That's a shame.
So I do recall seeing skip after skip full of pieces of the Tripod City, and fortunately this one did survive, and we've been able to get him back out on display.
Wow. I remember seeing, as recently actually, on YouTube, there was a clip from Blue Peter when they were talking about the special effects. First time using the blue screen effects for that kind of thing. And I think it was Janet Ellis's dad.
Yeah, Mike Ellis.
Yeah.
This gentleman here. Janet Ellis's dad, Sophie Ellis Bextor's granddad.
It's amazing, isn't it?
I remember Sophie being brought round the department when she was a baby, which makes me feel very old. And then finally we step into the second gallery up here, which has got a mix of bits and pieces. So one of the things that David Erskine was very keen to do was to try and explain to a modern audience, particularly a young audience, how and why models and props and things are done in a particular way. So the first case you come into, you immediately are struck by, well, we've seen these three items. It's a TARDIS, a Starbug and a tripod, but they're all significantly smaller than the ones that are in the main gallery. And the reason for that is, if you look at the big Starbug that we've got in the other room, it's a good 3.5 feet long.
Yep.
And so the set of its landing pad was sizable. Mm-hmm. But it also had this huge launch tunnel down which it flew. And if you start thinking, well, how big that would be to encompass that model, it becomes ridiculous. So what happened is that for the close-up shots of the Starbug on its pad, that was the size of model we did. Whereas for the full launch sequence of it coming out through the doors, we went for a model that was half the size.
Right.
That allowed us to reduce the size of the set by half. So that suddenly became a much more manageable creation. Still a big set, but much more manageable. And the same is true with the other props and models in this particular thing. The small tripod was used because it meant that the environment it was being dropped into, you could get 3 or 4 of them in shot at the same time. The small TARDIS was actually used because sometimes you didn't want to have the massive one. But this is also an example of my change of the way I wanted to work. So these are the sizes of models that traditionally, if you were in the effects department, they said build a model. It would be make it about this big because that's how big you can get in the back of a boot of a car. Once I actually started running my own company, I said, okay, we could do it that big, or we could make them huge and try and push it. It's this constant battle between wanting to go as big as possible to get the detail, but small enough to still be able to do what you want to do in the budget. So it's budget versus ambition all the time, but a nice little collection of smaller props, all of which can be seen in their larger scale next door.
The exhibition, yeah.
Then we've got, going back to Sylvester McCoy's era of Doctor Who. So this is Ace's cassette deck, built for her by the Doctor, for the Silver Anniversary story, the 25th anniversary story, Silver Nemesis. So I built this prop, and Sophie has never forgiven me for it because it's so heavy. And the reason it's so heavy is that it was built in about 2 nights out of whatever I could lay my hands on in the workshop. So it's got a cassette recorder in the middle of it, but it's also got valves and heat sinks and bits and pieces, and I wanted it to have the feel of an old 1920s Bakelite radio in the middle. So that bit's been sort of hand built out of timber and metal. But yeah, she had to do a lot of scenes of running through fields with this slung over her shoulder, and because they wanted to see the actual cassette deck actually working, it was also full of batteries. Nice prop, I'm very proud of it. It's very quirky, very recognisable, very, very popular with cosplayers.
Because it's made up of everyday items, it's easy for people to recreate.
Yeah. And on that note, directly next to it is a prop that's only seen in one very brief scene, another Sylvester McCoy story, and it's a Sylvester McCoy story called The Happiness Patrol, which features a sequence of two snipers on a rooftop looking down at crowds, and one of them is bemoaning his rubbish gun, and the other one going, oh, well, I've just got the latest one. And he's seen assembling this sniper rifle. And the reason it's here is that Perry Brayan, who was the effects designer, knew that he didn't have an awful lot of budget, but knew that this thing needed to function in a very particular way. So it's all made out of garden hose fittings that all snap together. And it's here to show particularly a younger audience. If you initially look at it, you go, oh, it's great, it's a space gun, I could never build something like that. When you actually start looking at each individual component, oh, well, yeah, I can buy that from B&Q, and oh, I can buy that from the local garden centre, and oh, God, yeah, that's a hose fitting, and that's a hose fitting. And so you go, well, you could build something like this. The trick is, how do you put them together in such a way that they hide their origin?
Yes.
So a very BBC prop, and people go, well, surely it's not done like this in big feature films, and yes it is. And the one I always quote is Qui-Gon Jinn's communicator from The Phantom Menace, which is indeed a Philips Lady Shave.
Yeah.
And obviously so.
Another example of that, I think it's one of the PKE readers in Ghostbusters. It's an old Radio Shack microphone that's got the mics that actually they go like that. Yes. And I've actually got one of those. So every time I see it, I've got that in that drawer over there, you know. Always wanted to recreate it myself.
So yeah, two more cases in this room, just showing a little bit of the mask making aspect of special effects. So one instantly recognisable, it's Davros, the creator of the Daleks. This is the second iteration of this particular character and how he looked. The original mask was designed by Peter Day, sculpted by John Friedlander, and worn by an actor called Michael Wisher. And that's the classic Davros that you see in the Tom Baker story Genesis of the Daleks. This is from his reappearance in Peter Davison's story called Resurrection of the Daleks. So a new mask sculpted by Stan Mitchell and worn by an actor called Terry Malloy. You've got all the components of how this mask was put together here. You've got Terry's original head cast, you've got the moulds that the mask was created from, and you've got a cast from those moulds to show how the final thing looks. It's just to give a little bit of context for how some of these things are put together. And we've got a display on the back wall that shows that process, photos taken at the effects department during the creation of this mask. And then next to it are two classic Doctor Who monsters, a Sea Devil from John Pertwee's classic story, The Sea Devils. So this is probably the oldest piece in the exhibit, 73 this comes from.
Wow. The year I was born.
There we go. And one of my favourites. So showing its age, but still hanging in there, and very, very popular monster. And then above it, from a later Peter Davison story again, a Silurian, so a related species to the Sea Devils. Again, the original version of this character first appeared in the John Pertwee era, but this was a redesign done for the 1980s, so a slightly more robust and chunky version of the Silurians, but nice to have both of these together in the same case.
On the card that you've got on there for the Sea Devil, it's just amazing to see that it has survived so well, And it says on the card that it's probably down to the seawater.
That's my personal opinion. I mean, masks from this era don't survive. The latex rots. The latex literally turns to goo. I've handled some of these things and it's like there's no saving them. But I've handled 2 or 3 Sea Devil masks now, and all of them have got this weird leather consistency. They're brittle, but they're not turning to goo the way that the others do. And the only thing I can think is that because the actors were, coming out of the sea wearing these things, that they were immersed in seawater, and somehow I think that has helped preserve them. I may be wrong, it may not be that reason, but the fact that so many Sea Devil heads survive and nothing else from that era does makes me think that that must be why.
Brine does preserve things.
Indeed.
So it's possible.
But I'm again, a personal favourite in my collection, a Sea Devil head, because again, I'm not the year I was born, I have to say. So I'm sort of considerably older by this point, but it's one of those moments that sears into your brain of these things coming out of the waves and marching up the beach towards the doctor. I mean, as a 9-year-old, I absolutely adored that. So, again, delighted to be able to get him on display.
Brilliant. It is absolutely superb.
What I touched on much earlier in our talk about we're not always doing science fiction shows. So this was actually from a documentary about the first moon landing, an ITV project called Moonshot, starring James Masters. They needed a shot of the lunar module on the moon's surface. The art department had built a full-sized leg and ladder for the astronauts to climb up and down, but the rest of the spacecraft was done in miniature, and this was the largest miniature that we could practically build, because it had to be carried out as hand luggage on a plane to the studios in Eastern Europe where they were filming. So a poor production assistant had to take out with her on the plane this model, and then it was placed on the set where they were filming the live action, and then the CG guys combined live action, leg and miniature spacecraft. So just a good example of a spacecraft model that's not a science fiction one. And
it's a really good replica though.
It's a lovely replica. I'm very proud of it. A nice team of people to work with and a nice thing to build. Now, I can't really talk much about this lot because it's not mine.
No. But this is basically a mock-up of a workshop, I believe.
Yes. So the other part of this environment is trying to give an impression of some of the tools, materials and bits and pieces you would need in a creature designer's workshop. So the museum has acquired a number of pieces from an effects artist who works in film and TV, and it's a good broad cross section of the sort of stuff, teeth and prosthetics and eyes and sculpture work. So very different from the model making work, but no less interesting. But again, you've got some iconic pieces here. Linda Blair's face cast from The Exorcist, Sigourney Weaver's head cast from Alien 3, some stuff from The Fifth Element.
And there's some Judge Dredd stuff.
Judge Dredd, Gladiator, cast of Chestburster.
It's awesome. So that's basically the majority of the exhibition. There are other things that we haven't mentioned, but you can always come around to the exhibition and have a look for yourself. After Mike had taken us around the exhibition, there was something else that I needed to do. Whilst we're here, Mike, I wanted to do something really special that we do for guests that we have on the show. And to be fair, I couldn't think of anybody more deserving to be one of our honorary crew members, because you've been involved in a show that inspired the podcast to actually exist. So because of Red Dwarf and your involvement in the industry and making or helping to make the British sci-fi industry what it is, we'd love to induct you on our honorary crew member wall.
Well, I'm Honoured. Thank you very, very much indeed. This is fantastic. I love the patch. I will have to find some appropriate apparel for it to go on. But that's lovely. Thank you very much indeed.
No, you're welcome.
Spanhead Productions are a small independent sound recording company based in rural Hertfordshire. We specialise in creating content for all your podcasting needs, whether it be field recordings, vox pops, or capturing the atmosphere during social events. Editing is a very time-consuming job, so Spanhead Productions are on hand to take away some of the burden for you. Just advise us on how you'd like your content to sound, and we will do the rest. We can even help you design and manage a website for your podcast too. Visit us now, spamheadproductions.weebly.com. That's spamheadproductions.weebly.com.
So that brings us to the end of this special edition of TGP Nominal. I'd like to thank Mike Tucker for chatting with me and taking us around the exhibition, and David Erskine at Discover Bucks Museum for making it all possible. If you want to visit the Beyond the Stars, a Propmaker's Guide to the Galaxy, it'll be at the Discover Bucks Museum in Aylesbury until October the 5th. Details of how to get tickets will be in the show notes. Well, that leaves me with one thing left to say, and that's thanks for listening. Take care, one and all, and I'll speak to you again real soon. And as John would say,
toodles, I say, toodles.
Well, that about wraps it up for this episode of TGP Nominal.
If you want to get in touch with us, then
send an email to garbagepod@virginmedia.com, where your input is our output.
Or click the social media icons at the top left of the page over at tgpnominal.weebly.com.
If you would like to subscribe to any of our podcasts, you can do so via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and TuneIn.
And you can listen to me going solo, bringing you the latest in movies and home theater for regular people in the Widescreen podcast over at widescreen.org.
Don't forget to rate and review us. If you like what we're doing here, then why not buy us a pint by clicking on the donate button on any of the podcast pages. And don't forget to spread the word about us.
Station, this is Houston ACR. Thank you. That concludes the event.